The hands were small. That was the first thing anyone would have noticed if anyone had been watching. Small hands moving fast in total darkness, wrapping a strip of rubber and nylon around a man's upper thigh with the kind of mechanical precision that does not come from a classroom or a training manual or a weekend certification course. The man was making noise, not screaming, not yet just a low, wet sound that meant his body had begun to understand what had happened to it. The hands did not slow down. 4 counts in, a voice said. Quiet, almost no inflection. Hold, 4 counts out. The man tried to follow, failed, tried again. Again, 4 in. He followed this time. The noise from his throat changed, not better. Just different, more controlled, the body doing what the body does when it is given something to track. The hands kept moving, kept tightening, and in the darkness of that moment, wherever that place was, and whenever that time was, the only sounds were a man's breathing and the soft mechanical click of a tourniquet being set to pressure. Then nothing. Fort Carson, Colorado, October 14th, 2024, 5:30 in the morning. The sun had not cleared the Pikes Peak range yet, and the air on the parade ground carried everything the mountains had shed overnight, the kind of cold that finds joints and stays there, that makes older men remember injuries they thought they had forgotten. The sky was flat gray, and the concrete of the parade ground was a darker gray beneath it. And against this background, 60 soldiers stood in formation with the precise stillness of people who have learned that stillness is safer than movement when a senior officer is unhappy. Their breath made small clouds. Nobody moved. Nobody looked at the person next to them. Colonel Frank Whitmore descended the 3 steps from the review platform slowly. He was 54 years old, 6 feet 1, and he had spent 3 decades learning exactly how much space to occupy in a room and exactly how long to let silence build before he spoke into it. He was good at this. He had always been good at this. He stopped at the front of the formation. Captain Mercer. A woman stepped forward. 5'4", dark hair, pulled tight eyes the color of storm clouds that gave nothing away. She was 26 years old, and she stood at attention the way a person stands when they have already decided privately and finally not to react to whatever happens next. Her name, according to her personnel file, was Captain Claire Mercer. Intelligence analyst, no combat deployments. Previous postings at Fort Meade and Peterson Space Force Base, desk work, the kind that leaves no mark except dates and signatures. She had arrived at Fort Carson 4 days ago as part of a NATO joint training exchange, her role listed as liaison officer. And in those 4 days, she had given no one any particular reason to notice her, until this morning. Whitmore walked toward her with the patience of a man who understood that the walk itself was the statement 60 people watching a senior officer cross a parade ground toward one person in silence was already its own communication. He stopped 2 feet from her and studied her the way an inspector studies something that has come off the line wrong. "You have a stain," he said, "on your physical training shirt." He said it loudly enough for the entire formation to hear. That was intentional. Claire did not look down. She already knew about the stain, a faint grease smear near the left hem, barely visible in the flat morning light the size of a thumbnail. It meant nothing, and Whitmore knew it meant nothing, and the knowing of that was present in the formation, the way pressure is present before weather changes, felt by everyone, named by no one. This, Whitmore said, turning slightly to address the formation while keeping his peripheral attention on her, is what happens when we allow standards to drift. When we bring in personnel accustomed to different environments, different expectations. He let the pause work. Corporal Marlowe. A large man near the middle of the second rank moved forward. Dex Marlowe was 28 and built like someone had assembled him to fill a space and create discomfort. He had been smiling since Whitmore first called Claire's name, not broadly, just the small, private kind that a person allows when they believe they are on the right side of what is about to happen. "Sir, inspect the captain's outer jacket. I want to verify it meets regulation." Marlowe moved behind her. She did not turn, did not shift her weight, did not alter anything visible about her posture. Her hands hung loose at her sides. The tendons in her wrists stood out, but that was all. Marlowe grabbed the back of her jacket collar with both hands and pulled. The sound of fabric separating was very loud in the morning cold. The jacket tore from the collar down the center back seam, the stitching giving way in one clean line, and cold air hit the skin of Claire Mercer's upper back and shoulders. What it revealed made the formation go quiet in a different way than military silence. This was 60 people processing something unexpected at the same time. The tattoo covered her entire upper back, shoulder to shoulder, a hawk with wings fully extended, each feather rendered with the obsessive detail that requires many hours and considerable pain to produce. The bird faced right. Its talons were curled. At the center of its chest, small, precise text. At the base of each wing, more text too small to read from distance, but clearly intentional. Not decorative, but designating the kind of marking that means something specific to a specific group of people who have no interest in explaining it to anyone outside that group. The laughter started from the middle of the formation and spread sideways. Marlowe, still holding the torn fabric, grinned. Someone said something about a bird sanctuary. Someone else made a comment about desk jobs and tattoo parlors. Whitmore let it run for a moment. Disdain performed requires an audience, then lifted one hand and the formation went quiet. He walked slowly around to face Claire from the front. He looked at the tattoo over her shoulder, squinting at the text on the bird's chest. He would not say what the text was. He was not entirely sure what it meant, and uncertainty was not something he displayed. Impressive artwork, Whitmore said, in a certain light. More sounds from the formation. Controlled collective amusement. Get a new jacket, Captain. Report to your assigned duty station in 20 minutes. He turned away. Dismissed. Claire exhaled, slow and controlled, the breath of someone releasing exactly what they choose to release and nothing else. She turned without a word and walked toward the nearest building. Her pace was measured. Her back was straight. The torn jacket hung off her shoulders, and she did not pull it together, and she did not look back. In the back row of the formation, Sergeant Major Earl Brixton did not move for a long moment after the dismissal order. He was 61 years old and 38 years in uniform, and there was very little left in the world that produced in him the sensation he was feeling now, a tightening in the chest that was not pain exactly and not grief exactly, but contained elements of both. He had learned long ago to identify this feeling and not give it room to run. He had seen the tattoo clearly. The full thing, the way the hawk faced right, the way the wingtips folded at a specific angle that was not artistic choice, but designation. That fold meant something precise to the 12 people who had been in Ghost Troop during its operational period, and to no one else alive who had not been there. The text at the bird's chest he had read, without appearing to read it because he had seen that text before, on a different person's skin, in a different part of the world, in a context he thought about every single day, whether he chose to or not. Ghost Troop, 361 Cavalry. Brixton closed his eyes for exactly 1 second. When he opened them, Claire Mercer had disappeared through the barracks door. Master Sergeant Roy Tanner came to stand beside him, arms crossed, already moving past the morning's entertainment toward the day's obligations. Hell of a tattoo, Tanner said. Yes, Brixton said. Desk officer, playing operator. Brixton did not respond to that. Inside the barracks bathroom, under fluorescent lights that had not been replaced in years, Claire Mercer stood at the cracked sink and looked at herself in the mirror. The hawk looked back at her from the reflection wings framed by institutional light. She reached into the breast pocket of her uniform and took out a challenge coin. The metal was worn smooth from years of handling, the kind of smooth that comes from thumbs running the same path over the same surface. So many times the surface starts to give. On one face, a hawk emblem. On the other, a serial number and a date. GH07114. March 2020. She turned the coin twice, set it on the edge of the sink, looked at the tattoo in the mirror. Then she smiled. Not a happy smile. The smile of a person watching something fall into place, not quickly, not dramatically, but with the slow, inevitable click of a mechanism that has been in motion for a long time and has just engaged the next gear. She set the coin back in her pocket, pulled on a fresh jacket, and walked out. Fort Carson had been a working installation since 1942, and it carried the quality that very old military bases develop a sense of permanence, slightly at odds with the impermanence of the people moving through it. The mountains to the west were visible from almost anywhere on post, unchanged and indifferent, doing what mountains do, regardless of what happens at their feet. The joint training exercise had brought 400 personnel from 5 branches, and Colonel Frank Whitmore was responsible for all of them. He was also responsible, in a way that appeared in no exercise memo, for the outcome of a financial audit scheduled to begin in 11 days. A routine Pentagon review of contractor expenditures and logistics procurement records going back to fiscal year 2017. He had been told it was routine. He had reason to believe otherwise. He had spent 7 years ensuring that certain financial movements between certain contractor accounts and certain shell entities remained obscured behind enough legitimate paperwork that routine review would not find them. He was generally confident in this work. He was not currently confident in much. What he needed for the next 11 days was a quiet installation with very few questions. Captain Claire Mercer had arrived 4 days ago asking no questions at all, and he had noticed her the way people managing a secret notice anyone who seemed slightly out of place. Her file was clean present in all the right ways, absent in ways that should not be absent. He had dismissed this as the typical gap between record-keeping and reality. He told himself he was managing his own anxiety by finding patterns that were not there. He mostly believed this. After the morning formation, he returned to his office and told Major Tom Selby to keep an eye on her. Tom Selby was 48 years old and unremarkable in the way that makes people useful for certain purposes. He was a logistics officer with professional access to records that other officers did not have, and he had been doing small favors for Whitmore long enough that the arrangement had become invisible to both of them. Not loyalty, just an alignment of interests that had calcified into habit. "Get close," Whitmore said. "Find out what she knows and what she wants." Selby found Claire at 11:15 in the administrative building, in the small office she had been assigned, doing what appeared to be routine file organization. He knocked on the open door. She looked up. He introduced himself. She smiled warm, slightly uncertain, the smile of someone relieved to be approached with kindness in a new environment. They talked for 20 minutes. Selby offered to help her navigate the installation's filing system. He mentioned access to certain historical logistics records that might be useful for her liaison work. He was careful not to be too helpful too quickly. Claire thanked him and said she would take him up on that. After he left, she opened a small notebook, actual paper, not digital, and wrote 3 lines in a notation system recognizable to approximately 40 people currently active in United States military service and no one else. She had known Tom Selby's name before she arrived at Fort Carson. She had known his office location, his access levels, and the nature of his relationship with Whitmore. She had been briefed on him the same way a surgeon is briefed on a complication expected to arise during a procedure, not as a surprise, but as a variable to be managed. She closed the notebook and went to her afternoon medical check-in. The base clinic was staffed by Dr. Ellison, a physician's assistant, with the efficiency of someone accustomed to processing patients who are reluctant to be there. He reviewed Claire's records, confirmed her vitals, and pulled up imaging from her last scan. "Fragments still at C6, he said, looking at the screen rather than at her. "Stable, same position as August." "Good. You know the parameters. Any impact, heavy activity, significant spinal loading, numbness below the C6 dermatome, you stop and come back here immediately." "Understood. Not after the exercise. Not at the end of the day, immediately." "Understood," she said again. He looked at her over his reading glasses with the expression of a man who has delivered the same instruction to the same category of person many times without expecting it to be followed. She left the clinic and walked back to the barracks. The afternoon passed in the unremarkable rhythm of a soldier adjusting to a new posting. Tanner briefed her on the exercise schedule with the particular condescension he had settled on as his default register for interacting with her, not cruel, just the manner of someone who has already filed a person away and does not expect to think about them much. Claire took notes, asked 2 procedural questions, thanked him. She went to the range afterward to check her assigned equipment. The M4 carbine was genuine but had accumulated enough use and insufficient maintenance to have developed a front sight post deviation 4 minutes of angle, maybe slightly more. Anyone who picked it up without accounting for that would print their shots low and left it anything beyond 25 meters. She held the weapon for 6 seconds, turned it slightly in her hands, felt where the wear was, set it down, noted the serial number in her notebook. Then she went back to the barracks and lay on her bunk and looked at the ceiling. Commander Nate Calloway had been a Navy SEAL for 14 years before his assignment to Fort Carson as Joint Training Liaison, and in 14 years he had developed a working respect for his own instincts. Not blind trust, but the kind of respect that comes from testing an instrument enough times to know its tolerances. His instincts were telling him something about Claire Mercer that his available data did not explain, and this gap was what he sat with that evening, running the available information again to see if the gap closed. It did not. She moved wrong. Not badly better than almost anyone he had seen move in a professional environment in years, but wrong for what she was supposed to be. The way she had walked off the parade ground after Marlowe tore her jacket, measured pace, spine absolutely straight, the complete absence of the hunched, self-protective movement that involuntary public exposure produces in people. That was trained stillness, the specific kind built by extended SERE instruction and reinforced by situations where stillness was not theoretical but operationally necessary. He opened his laptop and logged into the JSOC personnel database with his liaison clearance. Pulled her file. Everything matched her cover perfectly. Dates, assignments, cross-references, all coherent. A clean file. He requested the Level 3 expansion. The system returned access restricted. Level 5 clearance required. He sat back. Level 5 JSOC classification on an intelligence analyst's personnel file was not a routine anomaly. It was deliberately unusual, the kind someone had worked to create because they wanted a file to read one way from a Level 3 query and very differently from a Level 5 query. He escalated the access request to his SEAL Command liaison at Naval Station Norfolk. The response came back 40 minutes later. Not from Norfolk, from a Washington number he did not recognize. He answered, "Commander Calloway." A woman's voice, measured, accustomed to command. "I understand you just flagged a sealed file." "Yes, ma'am." "Tell me what you observed today that prompted the request." He told her. The way Claire had stood when Marlowe tore the jacket, the way she walked away, the train's stillness, the tattooed ghost troop insignia, the hawk facing right, the wingtips folded at an angle that was not decorative. And then he told her the thing that had been bothering him most, the thing he had not been able to place until just now. In 2021, during a forward support mission in eastern Afghanistan, he had monitored a radio channel during a medical evacuation call, and the voice making the 9-line report had used a specific breathing cadence that was unusual enough to stay with him. The same voice, the same cadence, silence on the other end. "Commander," the voice said, "what I am about to tell you requires that you not discuss it with anyone on that installation until I instruct you otherwise. Captain Mercer is operating under JSOC authority with a full mission brief. Her cover is her instrument. You are to observe and not intervene. If her cover breaks before evidence collection is complete, the mission fails, and everything she has worked toward goes with it." "Who am I speaking with?" he asked. "General Constance Harrell, Joint Special Operations Command. I'll be in touch." The line went silent. Calloway set the phone down and looked at the wall for a long moment. Then he thought about the way Claire Mercer had walked across the parade ground that morning, straight back, measured pace, torn jacket, cold air, and understood in the way military professionals understand things once they have been confirmed, rather than suspected, that he had been looking at the wrong file all along. That night, the installation was quiet. In his quarters, Sergeant Major Earl Brixton sat at his desk with a photograph he had not looked at in over a year. 4 men in combat gear at a forward operating base, mountains of Kunar province, identifiable by their sharp profile against a bleached sky. One of the men was Brixton, younger and heavier, squinting against the light. Standing to his left was a man with his arm around Brixton's shoulder, grinning at the camera with the ease of someone who had made a private peace with where he was. Master Sergeant Daniel Mercer, 40 years old in the photograph, taken 7 months before he died. Brixton looked at the photograph for a long time. Then he looked at the Ghost Troop patch on the desk beside it, his own patch from a uniform he had worn in 2020, faded to the pale gray that olive drab becomes after enough wash cycles. He kept it in a box in his desk. He was not sure why he kept it. He had not looked at it in 2 years. He thought about a radio channel on the night of March 14th, 2020, about calling for air support 11 times between 2200 and 0200 hours. About the last transmission he had received from Daniel Mercer at 0217, and about what that transmission had contained, and about the fact that he had told no one, not the investigating officers, not the review board, what Mercer had actually said in those final minutes. He had his reasons. They had felt like good reasons for 4 years. Sitting now with this photograph and this patch and the image of Daniel Mercer's daughter standing on a parade ground wearing her father's ghost on her back, they felt like something else. He put the photograph face down on the desk. He would think about what to do with what he knew. He would think about it carefully. In her barracks room, Claire Mercer sat on the edge of her bunk in the dark. She did not turn the light on. She reached into her breast pocket and took out the dog tags. Not hers, her father's. Master Sergeant Daniel Mercer. Blood type O positive. Service number. The tags were worn at the edges, the same way the challenge coin was worn. Same pocket, same hands, same daily circuit of grief and purpose that had become over time simply the rhythm of her life. She turned them over. On the back of one tag, engraved in letters someone had paid to have added after everything 4 words. "We don't leave our own behind." She had never been able to decide if this was true. She had spent a long time trying to make it true, which was different, and she knew the difference. She set the tags on her knee. Let them rest there, the metal warm now from her hands. Outside the mountains she could not see. In the dark were doing what mountains do, simply being there unchanged, permanent, indifferent to the concerns of the people at their feet. Colonel Frank Whitmore was 40 meters from where she was sitting. He had gone to his quarters at 2100 hours as he did every night, and he would sleep the way men sleep when they believe they are successfully managing a secret not well, but with the practiced regularity of someone who has made an arrangement with their own conscience and intends to honor it. He did not know her name, not really. He thought he knew it. He had read it in a file that told him exactly what she had needed him to believe. He did not know that she had known his name for a long time before she drove through the gate at Fort Carson. He did not know what she had brought with her or what she had already begun to set in motion, or what the patch on the inside of her jacket meant to the one man on this base who would recognize it immediately and completely. Claire Mercer sat in the dark and let the silence do what silence does when there is nothing left to plan. Her thumb moved once across the face of the coin. Then she lay down on the bunk, still dressed, and closed her eyes. Tomorrow the work continued. The shooting range at Fort Carson sat at the eastern edge of the training complex, a long rectangular structure with a corrugated metal roof. It was cold inside and it smelled like solvent and old brass and concrete that had absorbed years of percussion. At 6:45 in the morning, it was empty except for the range safety officer, 3 members of Bravo team running a pre-exercise check, and Master Sergeant Roy Tanner, who was standing near the equipment cage with a clipboard and the settled expression of a man who already knows how the next hour is going to go. He had assigned Claire Mercer to the morning range qualification as part of the exercise rotation. This was standard. What was not standard, and what Tanner had arranged with quiet deliberateness the previous evening, was the equipment she would find waiting at Station 4. The M4 carbine was genuine, not rigged, not broken, but it had been used enough and maintained insufficiently enough to have developed a front sight post deviation that any trained shooter would identify in the first few seconds of handling. The tactical vest was 2 sizes too large. These were not accidents. Tanner was not a cruel man. He had spent 22 years making accurate assessments of people's capabilities in environments where inaccuracy had real consequences. And he had learned that the fastest way to get an accurate assessment was to watch someone encounter an unexpected problem. He had formed a view of Captain Claire Mercer based on her file and 4 days of observation, and the view was not favorable, and he expected the next 40 minutes to confirm it. She arrived at 6:52. Fresh uniform hair, tight, no visible indication that the morning had cost her anything she was willing to show. She signed the range log, collected her hearing protection, and walked to Station 4. Tanner watched her from the far end of the range, not staring, monitoring the way range officers monitor peripheral and continuous. She picked up the M4. She did not raise it. She held it at low ready and turned it slightly in her hands, moving her right thumb along the lower receiver, checking the trigger group. Then she held the weapon still for approximately 6 seconds. Not performing, not fidgeting, just holding it the way a person holds something while their hands are telling them things their eyes cannot. She raised the weapon, feet at shoulder width, weight forward, the kind of stance that looks natural until you understand it is not natural at all. It is the product of repetitions so numerous the body has absorbed them completely. Her right thumb sat forward along the receiver. Her elbows were in. The grip pressure showed in her forearms. She fired 3 times. The cadence was even, not fast, not slow. The cadence of someone for whom speed is not the point. The point is somewhere else entirely. She safed the weapon and set it down. Tanner walked to the target. 3 holes in the paper, a triangle approximately 2 inches across centered in the upper thoracic region, at 50 meters, kneeling. With a rifle printing 4 minutes of angle low and left, which meant she had applied a 4-minute hole correction without a test shot, without a zero confirmation, without any of the procedural steps the protocol specified before engaging a target. She had held the weapon for 6 seconds and understood what it was doing wrong, and she had corrected for it before she fired, and she had placed all 3 rounds within 2 inches of each other. Tanner stood at the target longer than necessary. Then he walked back to the equipment cage and set his clipboard down on the counter. He had seen this grip before. 20 years ago at Forward Operating Base Falcon in Baghdad, in November of 2004, when he had been 25 years old and newly in country and still making the errors that newly arrived soldiers make. He had been assigned to a weapons familiarization session with a master sergeant who had looked at the way Tanner held his rifle and spent 45 minutes rebuilding the grip from the ground up, not the weapon, the relationship between Tanner's body and the instrument. The master sergeant's name was Daniel Mercer. He had told Tanner that the first thing you do with any weapon you have not personally zeroed is spend 30 seconds listening to it before you trust it. You hold it. You feel where the wear is. You learn what it wants to do, and then you decide what you are going to make it do instead. Tanner had carried that instruction for 20 years. It had become part of how he taught. He had assumed it was his. Claire Mercer had held that weapon for 6 seconds. She had not been taught by someone who had read about this approach. She had been taught by someone who lived it, and the list of people who taught this way was very short. And Daniel Mercer had been on that list, and Daniel Mercer had a daughter who was 26 years old. Tanner went back to his quarters after the range session and took out a photograph he had not looked at in over a year. He sat with it for a long time without doing anything else. He did not form a conclusion. He filed the observation and he kept it separate from the others, and he kept walking. The medical emergency happened on the second day of the second week. Private Garrett Wynn was 20 years old from Knoxville, Tennessee, and he had the physical confidence of someone who had trained hard and the technical inexperience of someone who had not yet learned what training could not prevent. He was attempting a wall obstacle on the eastern course, a 12-foot concrete barrier with standard handholds, when his right grip failed at the apex. He fell backward. The sound of him landing was flat and hard, the sound of a body making contact with ground without any of the natural buffering that controlled falls produce, and it was followed by silence of approximately 1 second before Private Wynn began to make noise. The compound fracture was visible from 20 feet. The tibia had broken cleanly, the distal fragment had rotated, and the skin had not held. Blood pooled fast on the gravel. The medic on duty was 300 yards east, treating a sprained ankle. Response time 5 to 6 minutes. In the context of an open fracture with active hemorrhaging, that was not a satisfying number. The soldiers near Wynn did what untrained soldiers sometimes do. In the presence of serious injury to someone they know, they crowded close and went still and looked at each other and at the wound in alternating sequence, as though one of those things would produce a solution. Claire Mercer had been 40 feet from the obstacle when Wynn fell. She stopped 2 feet from where he lay. 1 second, maybe 2. Long enough to feel the weight of a promise made in a hospital room to a woman who had already lost one person and was asking in the specific way that mothers ask when they cannot afford to be refused that she not lose another. Long enough to feel the weight of a different promise made to a different person who was no longer there to receive it or release her from it. Then she looked at Private Garrett Wynn, 20 years old, losing blood on Fort Carson gravel, looking at the sky with the expression of someone whose body had just delivered information. His mind had not finished processing, and the weight of both promises was there, present and real. And the decision was already made, had been made before she stopped. And what the stopping was for was to know that she was making it. She dropped to her knees. The impact on the gravel was hard. Garrett, firm not loud, he looked at her. Breathe with me, 4 counts in. She demonstrated, held his eyes. After 3 seconds, he began to follow imperfectly enough. She was already moving. Left hand maintaining his attention, right hand going to the cargo pocket of her pants. Personal medical kit, not standard issue, assembled over time by someone who has worked in environments where the availability of supplies had a known answer. Nitrile gloves. The lot number on the packaging read 2019. Nobody noticed this immediately. This is going to hurt, she told him. I need you to stay with me. Can you do that? He nodded. He was pale in the way that indicates blood pressure responding to volume loss. She packed the wound. Then she immobilized the fracture with a SAM splint from her kit, working fast and without wasted motion, talking to Wynn the entire time in a measured clinical cadence, not the unfocused comfort talk of someone who does not know what else to do, but the specific talk that gives a frightened person something concrete to track. She had heard medics at Mosul talk this way. She had heard it at a checkpoint outside Kirkuk. She had learned it from people who had learned it from necessity, not curriculum. Then she keyed a radio, not the training radio on her belt, a smaller one pulled from a different pocket. What came out of her was a 9-line medical evacuation request. Every line in order, delivered the way someone delivers information they have delivered many times before in circumstances where getting it wrong meant something specific and not reversible. Line 1 through line 9. Under 40 seconds. Complete. The helicopter arrived 7 minutes later. The paramedic who jumped out assessed Wynn, checked the wound packing, checked the splint, and looked up at Claire with something in the neighborhood of professional recognition. Who did the stabilization? Someone pointed. The paramedic looked at her work for a moment. You saved this kid's leg, probably more. Claire was peeling off her gloves. He did the hard part, she said. He stayed calm. She walked away before anyone could ask her anything else. Tanner had arrived at the edge of the obstacle course 60 seconds after Wynn hit the ground. He had stopped at the perimeter and not moved closer because there was nothing useful he could add to what was already happening. He stood there for 4 minutes and he watched. He watched the way Claire talked to the kid, not comfort talk, specific talk, the kind that gives a frightened person something to track. He had heard medics talk this way in Mosul. He had heard it once at a vehicle checkpoint outside Kirkuk in 2005 from a sergeant with a gift for keeping wounded men present while their bodies decided what to do. He had thought about that sergeant occasionally in the years since and had never been able to remember his name. When the paramedics took over and Claire walked away, Tanner turned and walked back toward the barracks building. He put his hands in his pockets. He did not take them out for a long time. That was the second time he revised his assessment of Captain Claire Mercer. He did not reach a conclusion. He filed the observation and kept walking, and the photograph in his desk drawer was a weight he was beginning to understand differently. On the gravel where Claire had been kneeling, the torn glove packaging lay near the bloodstain. Brixton, who had arrived from the far end of the course when he heard the commotion, crouched and picked up the packaging. He looked at the lot number, turned it over, put it in his jacket pocket. 2019, 5 years old, carried in a personal kit for 5 years by someone who had learned that supplies might not be available and had stopped waiting to find out. He straightened and watched Claire disappear around the corner of the barracks building. He thought about what he knew. He thought about what he had not yet said. He thought about Daniel Mercer. That evening, Calloway sat in a borrowed conference room with a window looking toward the Pikes Peak Range, invisible in the dark, and looked at the financial records he had spent 2 hours requesting and receiving through his JSOC liaison access. The records were complicated in the way that financial concealment is always complicated, not a single transaction, not a clear line, but a series of moves through entities designed to obscure the connections between them. Shell company registrations, contractor payment records, procurement chain documentation from fiscal years 2017 through 2023. He had been looking for evidence connecting Whitmore to the night of March 14, 2020, in Kunar Province, the redirection of air assets, the failed extraction, the death of Master Sergeant Daniel Mercer. He had expected to find something linking Whitmore directly to that specific night. He found that eventually, but he found other things first. The earliest transaction he could trace to the concealed network was dated September 2017, 3 years before Daniel Mercer died. He went through the records twice, mapping the structure. The network had been operational since at least 2017 and had been used on at least 4 separate occasions, each one corresponding to a period when operational security information about American military movements in the Afghan theater appeared to have been compromised. He sat back and looked at the ceiling. Daniel Mercer had not been targeted. There was no evidence of anyone deciding that Daniel Mercer specifically needed to die, no personal animus, no specific identification. The redirection of air assets on March 14, 2020, had been a transaction, the sale of logistics chain access for a fee, the buyer using that access to create a window for an operation that required American military assets to be elsewhere. Mercer had been in the wrong location during that window. He was not the point. He was the caudal. He had died because he was not worth calculating around. Calloway would need to think about how to give this to Claire Mercer. He would need to think about what she had come here believing and what the records were actually showing, that the thing she had spent years focused on was larger and older and less personal than she had known. He closed the files and looked at the dark window. He would think about the right moment. On the third morning, Specialist Dale Pruitt reported to sick call at 0600 with a fever of 103 degrees and a secondary infection that had been developing for 4 days. He was placed on quarters rest and removed from his assigned role as primary cryptographer at approximately 6:15, 90 minutes before a time-sensitive, encrypted communication from a forward training unit in Nevada required decryption and retransmission to coordinate a live-fire drone exercise. The message needed decoding within 20 minutes of receipt. Without it, the exercise would be scrubbed, requiring scheduling corrections that would generate paperwork. Whitmore could not afford paperwork 11 days before an audit. He summoned Claire Mercer to the communications center at 0740. The room was full. Signals officers, technicians, 2 members of the Exercise Oversight Committee who happened to be present. Whitmore had ensured they were present. Captain Mercer, Specialist Pruitt is unavailable. You are the senior intelligence officer on a post with a cryptography notation in your file. This message needs decoding in under 20 minutes. A replacement is available from Schriever, but their ETA is 45 minutes. A brief pause. Can you handle this? She looked at the screen for 8 seconds. The encrypted text was blocks of alphanumeric characters formatted in a way that indicated a non-standard cipher variant. Her expression did not change. "I'll need paper," she said. Someone handed her a notepad. She pulled a pen from her pocket and sat at an empty desk beside the terminal. Not at the terminal itself. She looked at the transmission timestamp and wrote it in the upper corner of the pad. Then she looked at the header data. Then she began to write. Not typing. Writing by hand. Frequency tables, substitution grids, columnar analysis done in pencil because paper does not crash and does not require a login. Lieutenant Jason Webb, standing near the door with his arms crossed, watched for 90 seconds and then turned to the officer beside him. "She has no idea," he said quietly. The room waited. At 3 minutes, she had filled 2 pages. At 6, a third page with a different column structure. At 9, she stopped writing and looked at what she had produced for 30 seconds without moving. Then she sat at the terminal, typed a long string of characters into the decryption interface and pressed enter. The screen cleared. Text appeared. Coordinates, frequency assignments, flight parameters. Complete. Correct. The exercise clock showed 11 minutes and 38 seconds elapsed. "Caesar variant with a rotating key seated from the transmission timestamp," she said. "Transmit it to the exercise coordinator." She handed the notepad to Webb and walked out. Webb looked at the pages. 3 pages of dense notation frequency, analysis letter, distribution tables, columnar transposition work. The work of someone who had done this in conditions where the 20-minute window was not a scheduling inconvenience, but a boundary between mission success and something worse. In the upper right corner of the first page, in a smaller hand than the rest, were 2 letters and a number, GT-0320. Webb photographed it with his phone and sent the photograph to Brixton because Brixton was the person on this installation he trusted to know things he did not. Brixton saw the message. The air left his lungs in a slow, controlled way that had nothing to do with technique and everything to do with recognition. GT-0320. Ghost Troop, March 2020. He forwarded it to Calloway with a single line of text. "We need to talk tonight." That evening, Calloway told Brixton what the financial records showed. They sat in the borrowed conference room and Calloway laid out the structure, the 2017 origin, the 4 transactions, the contractor entities, the movement of money through accounts designed to look like noise in a large procurement system. He was careful and precise. He did not editorialize. Brixton listened without interrupting. When Calloway finished, Brixton said, "She doesn't know about 2017. No. She came here thinking it was about one night." "Yes." Brixton looked at the table. "The logistics chain on the Kunar support rotation in early 2020, I went to the logistics office directly in February when we had a resupply problem. Someone in that office had access to the air asset scheduling, had access to the comms routing. The financial record for March 2020 is a payment of $180,000 through a Delaware holding entity," Calloway said. "The originating account traces back 3 layers to a contractor network used in the 2018 and 2019 transactions as well. Whitmore signed the abort paperwork that made the rerouting invisible officially, but the person who physically made the operational call, he closed the folder. The records show the access point. They don't show the person who used it. Not definitively, not yet." Brixton nodded slowly. "She'll get that in the room." "Yes," Calloway said. "That's hers to get." Brixton put his hands flat on the table. He looked at them for a moment. "There's something I need to tell you," he said. "Something I haven't told anyone." He told Calloway about the final transmission from Daniel Mercer. The timestamp 0217, March 15th, 2020. The words, he had kept them for 4 years and keeping them had felt like protection for something he had not been able to fully name until now. Sitting in this room with this information spread between them, it felt like something else entirely. Calloway sat very still while Brixton spoke. When Brixton finished, Calloway said, "She needs to hear that." "I know." "Well, now, after Whitmore is taken and the case is complete, when she can do something with it other than carry it into what comes next." Brixton nodded. "I know." Whitmore received Selby's report that evening at 2100 hours. Selby communicated in the Register of Administrative Concern, which Whitmore could parse easily after years of interaction. What Selby was saying in that careful language was that Claire Mercer had demonstrated 3 separate competencies inconsistent with her file that she had accessed, communications channels requiring higher clearance than her listed level, and that she was asking questions, not loudly, not obviously, but the kind of quiet, specific questions asked by someone assembling something piece by piece. Whitmore listened, thanked Selby, told him to continue his plan. After Selby left, Whitmore sat alone in his office. The audit was now 9 days out. He had managed every other variable. He had managed this installation for 3 years with the combination of authority and selective opacity that made certain kinds of financial irregularity sustainable over the medium term. Captain Claire Mercer was a variable he had not managed well. He had underestimated her on day one in the specific way that certain assumptions produce underestimation. He had looked at the file and seen what the file showed him and not considered what the file might be designed to show him. He had looked at a small woman on a parade ground and seen what he expected to see. He signed the order for the final compound exercise the following night. The layout he specified was not in the standard exercise rotation. The opposition role players he authorized were double the standard configuration. The communications parameters, radio frequencies, jamming protocols were specified in a way that left him significant deniability while ensuring that a team operating with standard equipment would lose communications within 3 minutes of entry. He gave the coordination to Selby to handle logistics. What Whitmore did not know was that Claire Mercer had spent 3 weeks giving Tom Selby information. Not incidentally, by design. She had known Selby's name, his office, his access levels, and his relationship with Whitmore before she drove through the Fort Carson gate. When he came to her office on day one and offered to help, she had understood the offer for exactly what it was, and she had accepted it, and she had spent the following 3 weeks giving him a carefully constructed version of what she was finding. The version she gave him was accurate in its details and misleading in its implications. It showed her finding evidence connecting to 2020 and 2019, but not to 2017. It showed her timeline as 2 weeks behind where she actually was. Every conversation she had with Selby, she logged. Every file she allowed him to see her access, she noted. She knew what Whitmore was being told. She knew what Whitmore was preparing to counter. She had been managing what Whitmore believed he knew about her the same way you manage a rifle with a known sight deviation. You account for where it wants to go, and you correct before you engage. The real evidence was in 3 places Selby had never been near. She had told no one this. Not Callaway, not Brixton. The mission protocol was specific: collect, document, do not compromise the chain until the chain is complete. That evening, when the compound exercise order reached her through a logistics coordinator who did not realize what they were relaying, she read it, understood what it was, understood what was coming. She opened a secure laptop from a locked case under her bunk and typed one line in encrypted format. Phase trigger confirmed. Moving to final collection. She closed the laptop, sat on the edge of the bunk, then she called her mother 3 rings. Her mother answered with the particular quality of attention that mothers develop when they have learned that certain calls carry weight. "Hi," Claire said. "Hi, sweetheart." She had thought about what to say and had not found the right thing. There was no right thing. There was only the truth compressed into the smallest possible form. "I love you," she said. A pause, her mother's voice careful and present. "I love you too. Are you okay?" "Yeah," Claire said. "I'm okay." She ended the call. Set the phone face down on the bunk. Outside, the October cold had deepened into the absolute quality it reaches around 2200 hours at high altitude, not cruel, just complete. She lay back on the bunk, still dressed, boots on. She did not sleep for a long time. When she did not dream. Tomorrow was the last night. Tomorrow, everything she had built either held or it did not. There had never been a middle outcome. She had known that coming in. The compound was a decommissioned storage facility at the southwestern edge of Fort Carson's training land, 3 miles from the nearest occupied building, set against a low ridge line that blocked the wind from the west and trapped the cold. It had the quality of genuine abandonment: cracked concrete floors, door frames warped by years of temperature cycling, interior walls modified enough times that no current floor plan matched the actual layout. Under normal circumstances, this was considered an asset for training realism. Under the circumstances, Whitmore had arranged it with something else. Claire arrived at the staging area at 2100 hours with the 4 other members of her assigned team. She had reviewed the briefing document twice. It described a standard compound clearance exercise, 3 rooms, mixed threat and non-threat targets, 1 high-value objective in an orange vest. Opposition force 8 role players. Time limit 20 minutes. She had counted 9 discrepancies between the document and what she could observe from the staging area: door placement, window positions, exterior lighting that would create specific shadow patterns inside. She noted them and said nothing. The team leader was a staff sergeant named Greer, a competent man operating in good faith with the information he had been given. He briefed the entry sequence with professional efficiency. Claire listened. She memorized the plan and simultaneously constructed the three most likely variations on what would actually happen inside. Corporal Dex Marlowe was present. He had been added to the team roster that afternoon, a substitution explained by a scheduling conflict that did not exist. He stood near the rear of the staging group. At 21:15, the exercise commenced. The first room cleared without significant deviation. Two threat targets neutralized. Team moving with reasonable cohesion. Then the hallway turned in a direction it was not supposed to turn, and the second room was 20 feet farther than the floor plan showed, and the entry angle was wrong. And when Greer led the breach, three role players came from a position the briefing had marked as a storage alcove. The first simunition round hit Greer in the chest at close range. He went down. Two more team members were hit in the next 40 seconds. The fourth burned through his magazine and called his weapon dry. The radio produced flat, complete static. The frequency had been jammed at a level standard training equipment could not punch through. 90 seconds from first breach to four team members down and one left standing in a corridor smelling of cold concrete and old machinery with simunition rounds still coming from two positions ahead and one she had not yet located behind her. Claire moved laterally, not backward. She pressed into the wall to her left, creating an angle outside the sight lines of the forward positions. She assessed what she had her assigned training weapon loaded with simunition. Her sidearm loaded with standard training rounds. The two radios on her body, one standard, one not. She pressed her back against the wall and she listened, and she breathed slow and deliberate, managing a nervous system that was very good at its own and needed to be directed rather than allowed to run on its own authority. The role player behind her moved. She heard the footstep on the concrete before she saw him, and she was already shifting her weight when he came around the corner, and the engagement lasted approximately 1 second before he stopped and said in the flat tone of a training professional who has just lost the scenario hit. She was already moving toward the third room. The third room was where the high-value objective was supposed to be, and it was where the remaining role players had consolidated. She could hear them through the wall. Not words, just the acoustic signature of multiple people in an enclosed space waiting for something. She counted the signatures. 4, possibly 5. She stopped in the hallway outside the third room and stood against the wall and considered with the clarity that certain kinds of pressure produce in trained minds what her options actually were. She could attempt the room and she would not clear it. She could call the exercise and walk out, and the mission would end here, and everything she had spent years building would not be used because she had been maneuvered into a position where the outcome of a rigged training exercise negated it. Or she could use what she had brought. She reached to the inside of her jacket. The secondary radio was smaller than standard issue matte black, not appearing in any training equipment, manifest because it was not training equipment. She had carried it into the installation in the same pocket as her father's dog tags because she had known from the day she arrived that Whitmore would eventually run out of administrative options and try something operational instead. And when that moment came, she would need a frequency. His jamming equipment was not calibrated to touch. She keyed the transmit button. Her voice was different from any voice she had used since arriving at Fort Carson. Flat and cold and without inflection, the voice of someone for whom radio communication is not technology, but native language. Ghost Troop Actual to Overwatch. Requesting immediate QRF grid, November Whiskey 4721. 5 personnel, 1 HVT, compromise exercise environment. Authenticate Tango Hotel November. 3 seconds of silence, then a voice came back, calm. Part of a system she had operated inside for a long time. Ghost Troop Actual authentication confirmed. QRF inbound. 2 minutes. She safed the secondary radio, put it back in her jacket, put her back against the wall outside the third room, and she waited. She breathed. She did not move. 1 minute and 53 seconds later, the exterior door at the far end of the compound blew open. A real breach, executed with the specific controlled violence that distinguishes professional entry from its simulation, 4 men in full tactical configuration, no visible unit markings moving through the compound, with the economic speed of people who have solved a building before they enter it. They did not hesitate at corners. They cleared the corridor in 12 seconds and hit the third room in a stack assembled so quickly it appeared simultaneous. The role players inside had approximately 2 seconds to process that the nature of the evening had fundamentally changed before they were instructed firmly and without ambiguity to stand down and clear the area. They cleared the area. The high-value objective, a training contractor in an orange vest who had been sitting in the third room for 40 minutes and had heard significant gunfire and was deeply relieved to see anyone was extracted and handed off. The lead QRF operator stopped in front of Claire on his way back through the corridor. He looked at her for 1 second. A single nod. Then he was gone and his team was gone and the compound was quiet. Total elapsed time from QRF call to extraction, 4 minutes and 11 seconds. Greer was sitting up in the second room looking at the doorway through which 4 unmarked operators had just moved with the expression of a man recalibrating his understanding of what kind of evening this had turned out to be. What he said carefully just happened. The exercise is over, Claire said. Get your team to the staging area. She walked out of the compound into the cold Colorado night. Outside, Brixton was standing 40 meters from the compound entrance. He had driven out alone without authorization because he had known what the evening was and had been unable to remain in his quarters while it resolved itself without him. He had parked where the vehicle would not be visible from the compound and walked the rest of the way and stood in the dark and listened. He saw Claire come through the door. He watched her stop and look up at the open sky for a moment, not dramatically, just the way a person looks at open air after being in an enclosed space, taking in the fact of it. Then she looked toward where he was standing, as though she had known he was there. She walked over. He could see in the light from the compound's exterior fixtures that she was moving differently than earlier in the evening, not impaired, but with the careful quality of movement that indicates the body has absorbed something and is managing it. "You're hurt," he said. "Fragments shifted," she said. "I'll have it looked at. Tonight. After." He looked at her. She met his eyes. There was nothing in her expression that asked for his concern, and nothing in his that withheld it, and they understood each other on this without further discussion. "Calloway made the call," Brixton said. "Harrell's inbound." "How long?" 30 minutes, she nodded. "Then we have time to do this right." General Constance Harrell arrived at Fort Carson by helicopter at 22:47, landing on the primary pad east of the headquarters building in a way that made no announcement and attracted the minimum possible attention. She was 56 years old and moved with the economy of someone who has spent 3 decades making decisions in environments where the cost of a wrong decision was specific and not abstract. She had been running JSOC oversight on this investigation from Washington for 4 months. She had authorized Claire's deployment. She had known when Calloway called 3 hours ago that the mission had moved into its final phase. She had not known that Whitmore would escalate this quickly or this overtly. She filed that assessment for later. The lockdown of Whitmore's command authority happened at 2300 hours. Military police positioned at the headquarters building. Whitmore summoned from his quarters on a pretext thin enough that it would not hold long, but did not need to. The conference room Harrell commandeered held 8 people, Harrell herself, Calloway, Brixton, Tanner, 2 JAG investigators who had flown in from Peterson on the same helicopter, Whitmore and Major Tom Selby, who had been invited without being told why, and who sat in the chair nearest the door with the stillness of a man who has begun to understand that the chair nearest the door is not going to help him. Claire entered last. Whitmore's face changed when she walked in. Not dramatically, he was not a man who allowed dramatic changes, but the change was there in the specific reconfiguration of a person encountering something they had calculated against and lost. She sat across from him. She did not look at him immediately. She set a small recording device on the table, opened a folder, arranged 3 documents in front of her with the unhurried attention of someone who has been in this room in some version many times. Then she looked up. "Colonel Whitmore, I'm going to walk through what I've found, and I'll give you the opportunity to respond after I'm finished. General Harrell will advise on procedure from that point." Whitmore said, "Who authorized this proceeding?" Harrell said, "I did. You're welcome to review my authority if you'd like to take a few minutes. I'd recommend against it." Whitmore was quiet. Claire began. She laid out the financial network first, not as a narrative, but as a structure. The 2017 origin, the entities, the payment routing. She identified 4 transactions across 6 years and connected each one to a period of operational security compromise in the Afghan theater. She identified the shell company structures, the Delaware registration, the 3-layer obfuscation sophisticated enough to survive routine audit and not sophisticated enough to survive the examination she had applied to it. Then she moved to the night of March 14, 2020. She described the error set rerouting. She described the 11 unanswered requests for support that Brixton had filed during the extraction window. She described the abort documentation Whitmore had signed, which contained a rationale that was internally consistent and completely fabricated. Then she pressed play on the recording device. The audio was 43 seconds long. The quality of a call recorded through a secondary device present, but not clean. Two voices. One was Whitmore. The other discussed the operational parameters for rerouting air asset scheduling on a specific night in March 2020 in terms careful enough to be deniable in isolation and completely clear in context. When the recording ended, Harold looked at Selby. Selby was looking at the table. "Major Selby," Claire said. Her voice did not change. "The call originated from your office line. The scheduling access used to execute the rerouting was logged under your credentials. The payment of $180,000 made 5 days after the event traces to a holding account established in 2018 under a name appearing in no military personnel record, but appearing in your daughter's birth registration documents as an alternate family name." Selby did not look up. "I've been talking to you for 3 weeks, Claire said. In those 3 weeks, I gave you information about what I'd found and what I was looking for. What I gave you was accurate in its details and wrong in its implications. I showed you evidence pointing to 2020 and 2019 and stopping there. You told Colonel Whitmore I didn't have 2017. That was correct. I didn't show you 2017. The 2017 evidence went to the JAG office at Peterson directly by courier 8 days ago." Whitmore's head turned towards Selby with the slow, precise movement of a man arriving at a conclusion he did not want. "Everything you told him about what I knew," Claire said, "was what I needed him to believe." The room held a silence that had weight. One of the JAG investigators said, "Colonel Whitmore, Major Selby, anything you say from this point forward is part of the formal record of this proceeding." Whitmore looked at Claire, not with anger. Anger required energy the evening had removed from him. He looked at her with the expression of a man having something confirmed that he had been trying not to confirm for a long time. "How long?" he said. "Since 6 weeks after my father's body was recovered," she said. Harold stood. "Colonel, you'll be transferred to pretrial confinement pending formal charges. Conspiracy, bribery of a public official, and accessory to the fraudulent redirection of military assets resulting in the death of a service member. Major Selby faces the same charges, plus direct operational culpability for the March 2020 event." She looked at the door. "Military police are outside. You will surrender your credentials now." Selby stood up abruptly. The chair scraped back. One of the JAG investigators was already moving. It did not take long. When the military police had taken both of them out of the room, the remaining 4 people sat in the silence that follows the completion of a sustained effort, not empty, not uncomfortable, just the natural cessation of something that has been running a long time. Tanner, who had not spoken during the entire proceeding, stood up. He walked to where Claire was still sitting at the table. He reached up to his left shoulder and unhooked the unit patch sewn there, not Velcroed, sewn the kind you put on with intention and take off with intention. "Ghost Troop, 361 Cavalry." He set it on the table in front of her. He did not say anything. He looked at her for 1 second. Then he walked out. Calloway stood, extended his hand. She shook it. That was all. Harold waited until the others had gone. "Ghost Troop's operational record will be declassified and entered into the permanent record. Every name, every mission. Daniel Mercer will be listed with full commendations consistent with his service and the circumstances of his death." She paused. "You did good work, Captain." "Yes, ma'am," Claire said. Harold left. Claire sat alone in the conference room. She looked at Tanner's patch on the table. She picked it up and held it. Brixton found her in the hallway outside 20 minutes later. She was sitting on a bench against the wall jacket off a medic working on her back. The imaging Brixton had arranged pulling rank in a way he rarely used had confirmed what the movement told them. The fragment had shifted 3 millimeters. Not into danger, not close to the cord, but far enough that the nerve running from C6 down her right leg had been compressed in a way that would take time to resolve and might not resolve completely. The medic finished, gave her instructions, and left. Brixton sat down on the bench beside her. He looked straight ahead. He had been carrying what he needed to tell her for a long time, and he had been waiting for the right moment with the patience of a man who understands that certain information should not be given until the person receiving it is in a position to do something with it other than be destroyed by it. He had told himself this was the reason. Sitting here now, he understood the real reason was simpler and less honorable. He had been waiting until he could bear to say it out loud. He reached into his jacket and took out a folded piece of paper. The paper was soft at the folds from being opened and closed many times over many years. He held it for a moment without unfolding it. "I was in the extraction zone that night," he said. I called for air support 11 times. I know, she said. What you don't know is what he sent me at 0217. He unfolded the paper and set it on the bench between them. It was a printout of a radio transmission transcript. The header showed the date, the time, the frequency, the call signs. The body of the transcript was 4 lines, Ghost 6 to Ghost Actual. I have eyes on. They are not pulling back. Get the team out. That is a direct order. Ghost Actual 6, we are not leaving it without Ghost 6 Earl. Get them out. That is the last order I am giving you. Do not make me give it twice. Ghost Actual copy. Claire read it. She read it again. The hallway was quiet around them. Somewhere down the corridor, a door opened and closed. Outside, the Colorado night was very cold and very clear. The stars present in the way that high altitude makes stars present, not decorative, just factual, just there. He gave the order, Brixton said. He made the decision. Not because Selby redirected the assets and not because Whitmore signed the abort. He assessed the situation and he ordered the team out and he stayed to hold the position. His voice was steady in the way voices are steady when a person has rehearsed what they need to say enough times that the emotion has been routed around rather than removed. Whitmore and Selby created the situation. Your father made a choice inside it, and the choice he made was the same choice he would have made if the assets had been there, if the support had come, if none of the rest of it had happened. She was very still. He didn't die because they left him. He died because he was Daniel Mercer, and Daniel Mercer didn't leave. The silence stretched. Outside, the perimeter patrol vehicle completed its circuit somewhere in the dark, steady, predictable, doing what it was supposed to do. Claire picked up the transcript. She read it a third time. Her hands were steady. Her face was turned slightly away from Brixton, and he did not look at her directly because he understood that this moment was not one that benefited from being observed. After a long time, she exhaled. Long and slow, the kind of exhale that is not technique, but release the body doing what the body does when something it has been holding for a very long time, it finally set down. Thank you, she said. I should have told you sooner. You told me when I could hear it. He did not argue with that. She was right, and he knew she was right, and there was nothing to do with that now except sit with it and not look away from it. He reached into his jacket pocket and took out the dog tags. Not Daniel Mercer's, his own. The ones he had carried since 2020 in the breast pocket of whatever jacket he was wearing, not as memorial exactly, but as the kind of weight a person carries when they are not ready to put something down and have not yet decided if they ever will be. He set them on the bench beside the transcript. Keep the record, he said, not for anyone else. For you. She folded the transcript carefully along the existing fold lines and put it in the breast pocket of her jacket. Same pocket as her father's dog tags. Same pocket as the challenge coin. The things that went with her. At 4:15 in the morning, she sat in the base clinic while Dr. Ellison reviewed the new imaging with the expression of a man seeing confirmation of something he warned someone about and is deciding how much to say. He said what was necessary. He said it without excess. The fragment had moved, the nerve was compressed. The prognosis was good for partial recovery and uncertain for complete. She would carry this. How much she would carry, it would become clear over months, not days. She listened. She asked 2 questions, both practical. She thanked him. She went back to the barracks and sat on the edge of her bunk in the dark. Outside, the installation was beginning to move toward the early activity of 0430 lights in the kitchen building, a vehicle on the perimeter road, the small sounds of a large institution waking up and resuming its work regardless of what had happened the night before. She put her right foot flat on the floor, felt the specific quality of sensation there, not absent, not fully present, the uncertain middle ground of a nerve that has been pushed to its edge and is deciding what it can do. She pressed the foot down deliberately. It responded, not perfectly, differently than it had 48 hours ago. She would adjust. The body adjusts when you give it the information and commit to what comes next. She picked up her father's dog tags from the bunk beside her and held them in both hands. She had come to Fort Carson to find out who was responsible and to build a case that would hold. She had done that. She had found more than she had come looking for. The network was older and larger than she had known, and the man she had driven 400 miles focused on was one node in a structure that had been operating since 2017 and had now been exposed completely. The financial records were with the JAG office. Whitmore and Selby were in pretrial confinement. The Ghost Troop operational record would be declassified. Her father's name would be in that record correctly, without redaction, with full commendations. And she had found the other thing. The thing she had not known she was looking for until Brixton put the transcript in her hands in a quiet hallway, and the weight she had been carrying shifted, not lighter but different. Her father had not been abandoned. He had been Daniel Mercer, and Daniel Mercer had made the same choice in the worst possible circumstances that he would have made in any circumstances, because that was who he was, and who he was had been the thing he left behind, and she had been carrying it without understanding that was what she was carrying all along. She set the dog tags on the small table beside the bunk. She looked at them in the dark. Then she got up and began to pack. At 04:30, she carried her gear bag out of the barracks and loaded it into her assigned vehicle. The air was cold, the deep, specific cold of a high-altitude night, surrendering to morning so slowly the transition was nearly imperceptible. Her right foot settled onto the accelerator with the slightly different weight distribution she was already learning to account for. She adjusted without thinking about it. You give the body the information and it adapts. She drove toward the main gate. On the seat beside her, the laptop sat open to an email received at 03:50. The sender address was a string of characters appearing in no public directory. The message was 4 lines. The first line was a location, Ramstein Air Base, Germany. The second line was a timeline, 72 hours. The third line was 3 file attachments, 3 individuals' names and faces, redacted roles listed, procurement, logistics, financial administration. The same network, different nodes, still operational in the European theater. The fourth line was 11 words of JSOC operational authorization that she had read twice and then left on the screen. She reached the main gate. The guard checked her credentials and raised the barrier. She pulled through and turned east onto the access road, the headlights opening a corridor through the dark. In the rearview mirror, the lights of Fort Carson receded. She watched them until the road curved and the installation disappeared behind the ridgeline. She thought about her father on a mountain in Kunar province, holding a position in the dark, sending one last radio transmission in the voice she had heard her whole life, steady, unhurried, certain. She thought about what certainty costs and what it is worth and how a person knows when they are in the right place, doing the right thing. She thought she was beginning to understand that. Not completely, more than before. The road ahead was visible exactly as far as the headlights reached. Her right foot sat on the accelerator with its new weight. She drove. In the barracks room she had vacated, the morning light came through the single window and found the small table beside the empty bunk. On the table, Claire Mercer had left one thing: her father's challenge coin. The metal worn smooth from years of handling, from thumbs running the same path over the same surface until the surface started to give. On one face, the Ghost Troop hawk wings extended facing right. On the other face, a serial number and a date, GH07114, March 2020. Below the date, in letters too small to read, without holding the coin close, the 4 words that had been there since the beginning. We don't leave our own behind. The morning light moved across the coin slowly, the way light moves across things that are still and waiting, that have no place they need to be, except exactly where they are. Outside, the mountains to the west were fully visible now in the early light, the Pikes Peak Range unchanged, impermanent, the same mountains that had been there when Daniel Mercer was alive, and would be there long after everyone who remembered him had followed him. They did not know what had happened at their feet the night before. They did not need to. They were just there the way they had always been there, solid and immovable and real. The coin caught the light, the hawk's wings held.